Hello, I'm Lawrence Holgate, and this is episode 12 of my book, Understanding John Stuart Mill, The Smart Student's Guide to Understanding Utilitarianism. And if you have my book, you can follow along as I read and make comments, and if you don't have the book, you can get it on Amazon.com, and just go to my website, Holgate Books, and get it there, or go to Amazon.com and get it from Amazon. We're at Chapter 5, still on Chapter 5 of Utilitarianism, a discussion of utilitarianism. And we're at Section 5.5, called The Origin of the Feeling of Justice. And Mill returns to the question he posed earlier in this chapter. What is the origin of the feeling that accompanies the idea of justice? Is it a natural feeling? That is it part of our psychological makeup that we have these feelings when we witness an injustice? Could it have, what Mill says, grown up by any known laws out of the idea of justice itself? Or perhaps it, quote, originated in considerations of general expediency, question mark. That's his words at page 49 of Utilitarianism. Mill discards this last alternative, although he doesn't provide us with a reason, but he's quick to add, though the sentiment does not, whatever is moral in it does. I'm not sure that clarifies anything. I think what he's saying here is that although the feeling of injustice doesn't arrive from considerations of general expediency, that would be utility, whatever is moral in the feeling does so arise. So when we have a feeling of injustice, we believe that there is some definite person or persons who are the victims of the harm, and we want to punish them. And in a sidebar, I say this. I'm reading at page 82 of my book. I'm still in section 5.5. Notice Mill's methodology in these sentences. He's not citing an empirical study to back up the above claim about feelings of injustice. He provides no data gleaned from observation and experience. Instead, he's making an analytical claim about the relationship of two ideas or concepts. One of them is feelings of injustice, and the other is a desire to punish the person who you believe has caused harm to another. Those are the two ideas or concepts which he says are logically implied. Mill's claim is that one could not have feelings of injustice unless she also has a desire to punish the person who she believes has caused the harm. You could not have a feeling of injustice, or a feeling that you would identify as a feeling of injustice, unless you also have a desire to punish the person who you believe has caused the harm. The two go hand in hand. Now, Mill's second point is that the desire to punish a person who has caused harm to someone else is a spontaneous outgrowth from two sentiments, both of which are natural or instinctive, the impulse of self-defense and the feeling of sympathy. There's an animal desire in all of us to repel or retaliate a hurt or damage to ourselves or to those with whom we sympathize, whether it be a family member, a friend, or one's village or tribe. In humans, this desire, Mill says, is widened so as to include all persons. Humans have a developed intelligence which allows them to notice that any conduct which threatens the security of the society generally is threatening to their own. And this reaction calls forth our natural instinct of self-defense. Here's a quote from Utilitarianism, page 50. The same superiority of intelligence, joined to the power of sympathizing with human beings generally, enables him to attach himself to the collective idea of his tribe, his country, or mankind in such a manner that any act hurtful to them raises his instinct of sympathy and urges him to resistance. Sidebar, again. If we assume that these remarks are based on Mill's own observations, coupled with what contemporary scientists have learned about human social behavior, then there is ample evidence to support his claim that when one's country is threatened, many will rush to its defense. The huge increase in the number of Americans who flocked to military recruiting stations after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 is only one of many instances in human history of the social instinct to defend and retaliate. Now, going back to my book, I'm reading at page 83. Before summarizing the findings of this chapter, Mill wants to defend against the objection that when our feeling of justice is outraged, we think only of ourselves, not of society at large or any collective interests. Mill wants to go again, he sees this as an objection and he wants to respond. Mill's response is that although it is true that some people feel resistance merely because they feel pain, if resentment is really a moral feeling in which they are reacting to someone as blameworthy, they will feel that a universal moral rule has been violated, a rule which is for the benefit of others as well as for their own. For example, in my own case, I felt resentment when I learned a few years ago that a famous bicyclist, I won't name names, had taken performance-enhancing drugs to help him win several international biking competitions. When I say the words, "I resent it," I am not only reporting the existence of a subjective feeling, my own feeling, called resentment. What makes my feeling of resentment a moral feeling is that it implies the violation of a universal rule that no athlete should cheat in competition. Mill concludes this section of the book with the following summary. He says that the idea of justice supposes two things: a rule of conduct and a sentiment which sanctions the rule. The first must be supposed common to all mankind and intended for their good. The other, the sentiment or the feeling, is a desire that punishment may be suffered by those who infringe the rule. There is involved, in addition, the conception of some definite person who suffers by the infringement, whose rights are violated by it. Now, there's a lot going on here. Let me give an example. I'm going to use my favorite names, imaginary names, in the example. Suppose that Hortense has stolen Oscar's gold watch. When Percival accuses Hortense of injustice, it must be because Hortense has violated a universal moral rule, in this case, theft, not a personal rule of Percival's. Second, Percival's accusation is backed by a desire that Hortense be punished. Third, there must be some definite person, in this case it's Oscar, or persons whose rights were violated by Hortense. So we've got these characters. One, Hortense has stolen Oscar's gold watch. There's Oscar, he's the victim. Percival is the one who has a feeling of injustice, and he accuses Hortense of a violation of a rule because which causes the feeling of injustice. The universal rule in this case she's violated is theft. It's not a personal rule, it's a public rule. And Percival's accusation is backed by a desire that Hortense be punished. Here's how Mill puts it. And the sentiment of justice appears to me to be the animal desire to repel or retaliate a hurt or damage to oneself or to those with whom one sympathizes, widened so as to include all persons by the human capacity of intelligent self-interest. From the latter element, the feeling derives its morality. From the former, its peculiar impressiveness and energy of self-assertion. That's a passage from Utilitarianism at pages 51 to 52. Now, if Percival feels not only a personal desire to retaliate for Hortense's theft of Oscar's watch, but also feels that everyone should repel or retaliate for hurts or damages of this kind to any other person in the same circumstances, then the feeling of retaliation becomes a moral feeling or sentiment. It's not a mere animal response anymore. So there's what he's feeling as a personal desire to retaliate for Hortense's theft of Oscar's watch But this becomes universal. He feels that everyone should repel or retaliate for hurts or damages of this kind to any other person in the same circumstances. And when that happens, the feeling of retaliation becomes a moral feeling or a moral sentiment, not a mere animal response. Let's turn now to section 5.6 of chapter 5. It's titled The Idea of a Right. Mill had earlier said that the obligation of justice is distinguished from moral obligation generally by its logical or conceptual connection to the idea of a right. And here's the quote once again. Justice implies something which it is not only right to do and wrong not to do, but what some individual person can claim as his right. That's a quote from Utilitarianism at page 49. This leaves us wondering about the nature of a right. What do we mean when we say that someone has a right to something, or that someone's right has been violated? Let's start with the latter phrase, violation. Mill's analysis of what we mean by calling anything a violation of a person's right involves two elements. First, there's a hurt to some assignable person, and second, a demand that the violator be punished. Thus, if I say that Sarah has violated Holden's right to property by stealing apples and oranges from his fruit trees, then we imply both that Holden has been harmed, and Sarah should be punished for this. Mill extracts from this scenario the following definition, and I'll go slowly. When we call anything a person's right, we mean that he has a valid claim on society to protect him in the possession of it, either by the force of law or by that of education and opinion, if he has what we consider a sufficient claim on whatever account to have something guaranteed to him by society, we say that he has a right to it. Page 52 of Utilitarianism. The proof of this definition can be found as an example that Mill uses to show how we go about proving either that someone does have a right or that they don't have the right that they say they have. And again, we'll go back to Mill's words. Thus, he says, a person is said to have a right to what he can earn in fair professional competition because society ought not to allow any other person to hinder him from endeavoring to earn in that manner as much as he can. But he has not a right to $300 a year. He's talking about 300 pounds, which in 1860 would be the equivalent of 35,000 in 2018. He has a right to $300 a year, though he may happen to be earning it, because society is not called on to provide that he shall earn that sum. On the contrary, if he owns 10,000 pounds 3% stock, he has a right to $300 a year because society has come under an obligation to provide him with an income of that amount. Did you follow all that? I can say it again. Here I'm asking you to answer, and you have no way of getting to me, so I'll say it again. The supposition is that suppose somebody says that he or she has a right what he can earn in fair professional competition. And let's suppose that we're not supposing anything now because society ought not to allow any other person to hinder him from endeavoring to earn in that manner as much as he can. That's what you mean when you say, I have a right to what I can earn in fair professional competition. Suppose I'm selling books. That's my fair professional competition, and say I have a right to what I can earn in selling books. And what do I mean? I mean that society ought not to allow any other person to hinder me from endeavoring to earn in that manner as much as I can. Let's suppose what I can earn is $300 a year. Okay, forget about what that means any longer. Let's suppose it means $300 a year. I don't have a right to $300 a year just right off, though I may be happening to earn that much because society is not called on to provide me with $300 a year. On the contrary, if I own, Mill says, if I own 10,000 pounds, 3% stock, then I have a right to $300 a year because society has come under an obligation to provide me with that income of that amount. There are rules about that. Now, Mill concludes this account by restating his definition. Quote, "To have a right, then, is, I conceive, to have something which society ought to defend me in the possession of." I'll repeat that. To have a right is, I conceive, to have something which society ought to defend me in the possession of. End quote. And to anyone who objects to this definition by asking the question, why ought society do this, Mill replies, I can give no other answer than general utility. Thus, if someone wants to know why society ought to defend persons who endeavor to earn 300 or more in fair professional competition, Mill would answer that this promotes the greatest good for the greatest number. And if asked the same question about why society ought not to defend persons who want or demand to be given the same amount from the public coffers, Mill would answer that this would not promote the greater good. Mill is coming back to utility. He doesn't come back to natural law when asked that question. If somebody says, why ought society to protect you? He's not going to say, because it's a law of nature. He's going to say, utility. It's the best thing to do. It produces the greatest good for the greatest number if we have laws of that kind. I'm going to stop here right now. The next session, I promise I'll be on time on Monday. Well, I shouldn't make these promises, should I? Monday or Tuesday of next week. We're going to have an imaginary conversation between John Stuart Mill and John Locke about rights, about natural rights. I've created one. I bid you to listen to it, and thank you for listening now, and I'll be talking to you next week. Thank you.